Hello and welcome to the Capitalism K lecture. My name is Lila Lavender. I use she, her pronouns, and I would say I was decent at debate when I was a competitor. In this lecture, by Will White and myself, we are briefly going to cover the revolutionary proletarian line we should be advancing within our CapKs, as well as some things that you can do when you're writing your CapK to actually do so. As a result of that, then, this lecture will not so much cover the baseline structure of the K or the technical strategy of each section of the K. If that is something that you're interested in, I would recommend either watching our lecture on the LOCK or Hunter's lecture on the KF, as both of those lectures are going to cover that more thoroughly. With that said, let's now get into our brief lecture on the CapK. To start, it's important to note that competitive debate within the U.S. is an institution of U.S. monopoly capitalism and thus imperialism. As a result of this, it means that debate and the vast majority of debaters have a bourgeois or petty bourgeois class basis. Given this in a variety of different ways, debate attempts to train us to be class enemies of the U.S. and international proletariat and oppressed masses, to be class collaborators with the Yankee imperialists in our context. In the context of the CapK, this looks like debaters, as a result of having a class interest in doing so, spreading all manner of opportunisms or revisionisms, i.e., defending parliamentary cretinism as the phony strategy for proletarian revolution within the U.S., defending Marxism-Leninism at this historical stage, tailing the U.S. labor aristocracy, advancing the Browderite revisionism that Yankee imperialism will peacefully transition into socialism, etc. Or in other words, defending that which liquidates the revolutionary soul of Marxism and thus at this historical stage liquidates the revolutionary soul of principally Maoism, that which sacrifices the strategy of proletarian revolution for short-term gains that only maintain the bourgeoisie's, or in our case the Yankee monopoly capitalist, class rule, all the while wearing a phony Marxist or anti-capitalist mask. We must struggle against this in debate, struggle against it with proletarian line struggle more specifically. Why? Well, principally, we must do so because opportunism and revisionism are the other side of imperialism. They serve no other role than counter-revolution, no other role than defending the class rule of the monopoly capitalist imperialists or bureaucratic capitalists and big landlords who serve them in the colonies/semi-colonies, no other role than defending the exploitation of the proletariat and oppression of the masses, no other role than defending the imperialist enslavement of the colonies and semi-colonies. Thus, objectively, in debate, and more importantly otherwise, we must struggle against all opportunisms and revisionisms. Secondarily, it should be obvious why, if that is the case, if we claim to care about crushing the genocidal monopoly capitalist and imperialist system, and thus we're reading CapKs in debate in the first place, why we should struggle against all opportunisms and revisionisms in debate. The utter baseline of doing so within debate, when writing your CapK or otherwise, means defending the command and guide of the world proletarian revolution, that being Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, principally Maoism. Why? Because through practice and thus scientifically, Maoism has been proven to be the command and guide of proletarian revolution in any country. It has been proven as such in reality by the international proletariat and oppressed masses, not by bourgeois experts living off the blood of the masses and faithfully serving the class oppressors. Maoism has been scientifically proven by the Great October Socialist Revolution and socialist construction within the Soviet Union, by the success of the Chinese People's War to seize power against the KMT and socialist construction in New China, prior to when the capitalist rotors seized power within the CPSU and CPC respectively. It's been proven by all of the ongoing proletarian revolutions in the world right now, in India, in Peru, the Philippines, and in Turkey, all of them being ongoing people's wars to seize power led by their militarized Maoist communist parties. The necessity of the leadership of a militarized communist party as the vanguard of the proletariat has been proven from the Paris Commune to the ongoing Peruvian People's War to seize power. People's War as the universal strategy for proletarian revolution was proved by the success of the anti-Japanese War of Resistance and the CPC's War for Liberation against the KMT, by the success in advance of all the ongoing People's Wars to seize power, despite the most brutal imperialist-backed counter-revolutionary wars. And it's been proven by negative example by the failure of the Foucaultist armed struggles from the Red Army faction to the Weather Underground in the imperialist countries. The necessity of the proletariat seizing political power and building their class rule through the militarized Maoist Communist Party was proven by negative example by Allende's social fascism in Chile and the tragic defeat of Thomas Sankara's revolutionary junta in Burkina Faso. The necessity of continuing proletarian class struggle throughout socialism, through successive proletarian cultural revolutions, was proven by the Red Faction in the CPC's protracted struggle against the capitalist rotors, and proven by negative example by the Pranchada capitalist rotor clique seizing power within the CPN Maoists and tragically defeating the Nepali People's War to seize power. Where are the opportunists and the revisionists within this history? Where are the opportunists and the revisionists within the current U.S. Communist movement and the international Communist movement? They are trying their hardest to hold back proletarian revolution, to lick the boot of the monopoly capitalist imperialists, to mislead the international proletariat and oppressed masses, and thus to do nothing but serve their counter-revolutionary role. Thus, to cease debate from being regulated to the garbage heap of opportunism and revisionism, we must, at the very least, advance the shining red banner of Maoism within our cap case. Now that we have established such, let's talk about a few things that we can do in reference to building a cap K. The most strategic place to start when writing your cap K is to first grasp what the central thesis of your cap K is going to be. Of course, your cap K is going to be criticizing monopoly capitalism, imperialism, and the bureaucratic capitalism or semi-feudalism in the colonies/semi-colonies that serves it. But is your cap K focused on a specific counter-revolutionary violence that is the product of the bourgeoisie's class rule? Is your cap K applying principally Maoism to answer specific questions within reality? Is your cap K a specific shell that's focused on a specific communist movement, on a specific struggle to initiate or develop people's war to seize power led by their militarized Maoist Communist Party in a specific country? That is the first place that you want to start when you're writing a cap K, because that is going to change and guide every other section of your K. In the context of an example, let's use an alternative to illustrate this point. Let's say that you are reading a shell that advanced the revolutionary proletarian and thus principally Maoist line on Chilean national liberation. If you were doing so, your alt would defend new democratic revolution through people's war to seize power and thus led by the militarized Communist Party of Chile reconstituted under Maoism, in firm class alliance with the Mapuche national liberation struggle and all other national liberation struggles against the Chilean bureaucratic capitalists and thus against Yankee imperialism. That obviously would be a very different alt than if you are reading a criticism that advanced the principally Maoist line on socialist revolution, initiating people's war to seize power here within the US. Thus, if we know that when we are cutting our cap case shells, we want to start with the central thesis of our shell, how should we approach writing the framework section of our shells? Well, first and foremost, in the context of what arguments you need to strategically include within the framework section of any K, you want to make sure that you're grounding yourself within the substance of your K. Not only within Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, principally Maoism itself, but within whatever the principal focus of your shell is. In my opinion, far too many teams fall into the trap of making the framework section of their cap Ks purely strategic framing arguments. While in the abstract this approach to the framework of the cap K sounds strategic, it often leads to jettisoning, writing, and thus reading a whole lot of important top-level thesis arguments for your K, which unfortunately only works against the team reading the cap K in most rounds. That's not only true because many of these top-level thesis arguments can be extended to answer the bourgeois nonsense most MG/LOCs will read against your shell, but also because of judges. Or more specifically, the fact that as a result of the vast majority of judges having a petty bourgeois class position and thus a monopoly capitalist imperialist class collaborationist line, the fact that as a cap K debater, you're going to have to do more work to struggle against the judges' class interests and how that will guide their evaluation of your K. Putting priority on these top-level thesis arguments can make it more difficult for your judge to misconstrue your arguments or to fill in arguments for your opponents, or at the very least, make the class nature of why they are doing so more explicit when they do so. Let's use the proletarian feminism shell, the principally Maoist line on women's emancipation that I helped write for PDB for NPTE this year as an example. While there are definitely strategic framing arguments within the framework of that shell itself, like the dialectical materialism framing, the principal aspect and thus vast majority of the framework is top-level thesis arguments. For example, arguments that correctly justify why private property is the root of women's oppression and why only the revolutionary proletarian line is able to guide women's emancipation. Since a large component of other teams' counter-revolutionary strategies against our proletarian feminism shell was reading the nonsense that, quote, monopoly capitalism and imperialism is key for women's liberation, end quote, these framework arguments and the warrants within them could easily be extended within the MG to straight turn this bourgeois feminist nonsense, plus establish warrant weighing in our favor. In addition, since the vast majority of judges' class interest is in class collaborating against proletarian and oppressed masses women, against the principally Maoist line, reading and winning these framework arguments made it more difficult for judges to do so when evaluating these rounds. Because if these top-level thesis arguments are being read and won on the flow, either it means that in that round itself the judge is forced to align with the principally Maoist line on women's emancipation, or they don't, reject it, and mask off of their class interests. As for the links, impacts, and alt section of the cap K, and thus the remainder part of any K, those are not specifics that we're going to cover in the remainder of this lecture. The reason being that this lecture is already getting pretty long, and on top of that, when it comes to examples of how to think about constructing the links, impacts, or alt of a cap K, Will and I already gave multiple examples of such within the LOCK lecture. So if that is something that you are still interested in and have not watched the LOCK lecture as of yet, then I would definitely point you in that direction. For now though, this is the end of Will and I's cap K lecture. After watching this, if anyone has any further questions of anything advanced within this lecture or would just like to talk, then please reach out to me. I won't speak for Will, but I'm sure that they would concur. Hope all of you are having a great rest of your day, and thank you so much for listening to this lecture.